What do you do when an anonymous stranger knows your address, your name, and your secrets, and sends it all to you in a single email after a harmless late night click? This is just one of the terrifying stories we're exploring today about the dangers lurking in the internet's darkest corners. A download I couldn't cancel or delete. It all started late one night when a college student named Mark came across a link during a forum rabbit hole. He had no plans to explore the dark web specifically, but forum after forum, click after click, he somehow found himself staring at a dark, minimalistic web page with a single caption in bright red letters: exclusive content for the curious. Beneath it, a button read, "Download now." Mark was no stranger to online curiosities. He'd spent hours on Reddit threads, conspiracy sites, and seemingly strange corners of the internet. This looked no different to him, just another shady gimmick, spitting out a half-baked video or some kind of ancient malware. But the simplicity of it gave him pause. There was no flashy animation, no spinning graphics to scream scam, just that bright red font and that button. Curiosity tugged at him. He figured this was probably some poorly made project or, if he were really lucky, an obscure flash game to pass the time. With a shrug, he clicked. The download started immediately. A small progress bar appeared at the corner of his screen, claiming to transfer a file simply titled Rewind Exe. Mark frowned. It wasn't huge, but its download speed was weirdly quick, far faster than his usual Wi-Fi could handle. When it finished, he hovered his mouse over the file, instinctively scanning the file name for anything suspicious. He opened the folder, but before he could even decide whether to delete it or ignore it, the file opened itself. At first, the application was nothing but a black screen, almost like a video, though there was no sound. And for what felt like 30 long seconds, that's all it was. Pure, dead silence. His cursor wouldn't move. Alt plus tab didn't work. Control plus Alt plus delete wouldn't open the task manager. Then, as he sat back in a mild annoyance, the screen suddenly glitched. A series of static bursts filled his monitor, and somewhere faint in the background, so faint Mark almost thought he imagined it, came a whisper. Not in English, not in any language he recognized. And yet, it felt like it was talking to him. The whispers grew louder, before cutting off with a sharp pop. The screen now displayed a scene. It looked like the inside of someone's house. Low quality, shaky handheld footage, like something shot without much care. Beneath the video, a fine string of text scrolled slowly across the bottom, matching the same red font Mark had seen before. Watch them all. All of who? Mark muttered to himself. The audio began again, quiet shuffling noises, like someone adjusting their footing off camera. Then, without warning, a figure stumbled into the frame. It was a man, dressed in dirty clothes, clutching his stomach as if in pain. Mark leaned closer to the screen, focusing on the man's mouth, the way his lips moved, slightly out of sync with the audio. Muffled words spilled out of his mouth, guttural and alien. And then the screen went black. His laptop's brightness dipped to 0, almost like it had gone to sleep. But Mark felt no reassurance. Something about the sudden silence left his chest tight, and before he even bothered to reach for his power button, his laptop whirred back to life. The screen lit up briefly again, only to display his own desktop. But it wasn't right. Every icon on his desktop had been replaced with a small, grainy photo. And those photos, Mark's hands grew cold. Each one was a shot of him. There was one of him, sitting in his dorm room from earlier that day. Another photo from inside a coffee shop he often visited near campus. The timestamps lined up with spots where Mark knew he'd been, but there was no way anyone could have been with him unnoticed. No way someone could have taken these without him seeing them. He slammed his laptop shut, breathing heavily. His chest felt tight, his throat dry. As much as he wanted to write it off as an elaborate prank, pranksters didn't magically take pictures of you in places you hadn't shared. He left his bed and peered out his window, scanning the street below for anything suspicious. College students passed by in pairs, laughing, drinking the night away. But the longer he stood there, the pricklier the back of his neck became. When he opened the laptop again, the photos were gone. Instead, his screen displayed another message on the same black background. Don't delete me. Mark tried everything to remove the program after that. Antivirus scans, downloads of file locking tools, even manual deletion. Every time an error sprang up, it gave some equally cryptic explanation. File is currently in use. Try again later. A system restore failed as well, claiming the rollback data had been manipulated. After another half hour of troubleshooting, Mark reset the laptop hard, holding the power button until it shut off entirely. To his growing relief, it didn't immediately boot back into the eerie imagery. It went right back to his login screen, as if nothing happened, and Mark allowed himself to breathe as he typed in his password. He even managed a dry chuckle, shaking his head at how ridiculous that whole ordeal felt. Then came the email. It hit him the second his Wi-Fi reconnected. A new message sitting bold and unread. No subject. The sender's email was a garbled mess of randomly generated text. He clicked on it before thinking twice, and his stomach churned immediately. The email file attached was nothing but plain text, but its contents were unnervingly short. That wasn't very nice, was it? The sender knew. They knew. That night, Mark removed the battery from his laptop, packed it into a case, and left it abandoned in the far corner of his family's garage during a visit home. He used his parents' internet to completely reformat his phone and buy a used desktop computer, one he vowed he'd lock down from now on. For weeks, he didn't hear anything further. No more emails, no strange photos, just silence. But still, late at night, he sometimes caught himself staring out his dorm window, waiting, searching, wondering, because the thing he realized deep down was that he didn't completely understand what he'd downloaded or who it might have come from. The mystery box that should have stayed closed. What would you do if a package showed up at your doorstep, anonymous and unexpected? At first glance, it seems like a harmless delivery, a simple cardboard box sealed with tape, with no name or return address. But what if, as you opened it, you found something so disturbing that you immediately wished you hadn't? Something so deeply unsettling that it made you question why you ever thought it was a good idea. Dark web mystery boxes. Have you heard of them? On the surface, it sounds like a twisted game, marketed more as an internet trend than a genuinely sinister service. Anonymous sellers on hidden marketplaces promise to send buyers a box filled with items pulled from the macabre underbelly of the world. Sometimes the sellers tease their customers with vague descriptions, a box containing the forgotten and the forbidden. For others, it's an outright dare. Do you have the courage to open Pandora's box? What links all these transactions is one unsettling commonality. You never know what you're getting until it's too late. Now, some argue that these boxes are just overpriced hoaxes designed to cash in on thrill seekers' curiosity. Buyers report receiving random junk like Halloween props, cryptic handwritten notes, or even dirt. Cheap scares for a lot of money. But not every story has such a light-hearted end. Just ask the woman who received a mystery box that left her spiraling into paranoia, watching her back for every car that drove by. She'd read all the theories on forums. Mystery boxes were harmless, people claimed. Just hype, designed for unwitting thrill seekers. Some influencers even filmed themselves unboxing these packages, laughing at their creepy but ultimately harmless contents. Emboldened by the idea that it was entertainment and little else, the woman decided to order one herself for $100 in untraceable cryptocurrency. She expected the kind of bizarre but fake items that made good Instagram material. She was wrong. The package took weeks to arrive. It showed up on her porch without warning, and she never saw the person who delivered it. The lack of a return address wasn't as eerie as she expected. She reminded herself that this was normal. Mystery boxes came from faceless sellers. It was part of the dark web's appeal. What unsettled her, though, was the box itself. It was battered and dingy, barely held together with old duct tape. A faint, sickly smell leaked through the packaging, too faint to place, but strong enough to make her uneasy. She chalked it up to the overactive imagination that brought her to the dark web in the first place. Still, her hands trembled as she pulled out a box cutter. The smell hit her as soon as she slit the tape and lifted the lid. It was sharper than before, a pungent mix of rot and chemicals, like decay stewing under industrial cleaner. Her stomach churned, but she pressed on, lifting away the crumpled newspaper on top. And when she saw what lay underneath, she froze. The first thing she noticed was the doll, a pale porcelain doll, so old its face had yellowed. Its glassy black eyes bore into her as its painted lips curled into a smirk. Worse, its hands were caked with something dark, a dried, reddish-brown coating that crawled all the way up to its wrists. It didn't take much to imagine what it might be, though she tried to convince herself otherwise. Next, she found what could only be described as artifacts of someone's life. An old, crumpled photograph in black and white, so faded that only the faint outlines of figures were visible. A leather-bound journal with pages torn out, but scraps of handwriting still pressed deep into the blank spaces. There was a necklace, too, a simple silver chain, tangled so tightly she couldn't pull it into shape. Perhaps the strangest part was a clump of long black hair knotted tightly in a ribbon. It seemed absurd, grotesque, and yet painfully intimate, like she was rifling through pieces of someone's history, someone who no longer existed. But what pushed her over the edge was at the very bottom of the box. A small plastic bag lay there, and as she reached for it, dread washed over her. Inside was a single USB drive, scratched and dented but clearly used. Her eyes stayed on it for what felt like forever. Some instinct told her the contents of that drive were worse than everything she had just unpacked, but she couldn't bring herself to find out. She slammed the box shut and shoved it into the corner of her living room, trying to distance herself from what she'd just unleashed. That night, she slept with every light in the house on, but things only got worse. Over the next couple of days, strange events began to unfold. First, there was the car, a beat-up sedan parked across the street from her house for hours. She noticed it while washing dishes after dark, its silhouette barely visible in the orange glow of a streetlight. She couldn't make out who was inside, if anyone was inside, but it stayed far longer than seemed normal. And when she finally turned away from the window, the knot of unease in her stomach tightened. It felt like she wasn't alone. Then there were the emails. It started innocently enough, spam messages from unrecognizable addresses, but as the days passed, they became pointed. Subject lines containing her full name, cryptic sentences like, "We hope you liked your purchase." When she clicked into one, it simply read, "Check the USB." Receiving that was bad enough, but when she tossed the USB into the trash the next morning, another email arrived by noon. Throwing it away isn't enough. And perhaps most horrifying, no matter how much she searched, she couldn't find the listing or the seller's profile on the dark web anymore. The storefront had disappeared as though it never existed, leaving her with no trace of who she'd purchased the box from or how they were able to contact her. The final straw came one evening when she returned home from work and found a new package sitting by her door. It was the same size as the last, but this one wasn't sealed. Inside was the USB drive, the tangle of black hair, and the torn photo from her original box. Only this time, the photo had been altered. A single figure, once blurry and indistinct, now bore an eerily clear face. Her face. The smell of decay hung heavy around it, even though the box itself seemed empty aside from the items inside. Panic consumed her as she threw everything away for good this time. She blocked every email address and disconnected her computer, hoping to sever any connection to whoever was tormenting her. But it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. Her days were consumed by the feeling of being watched, her nights broken by the sound of cars idling outside her house. Eventually, an overwhelming sense of paranoia forced her to move. Even after she started over in a new city, she couldn't shake the fear. Every package left on her doorstep, every unfamiliar car on her street sent her heart racing. The darkness she'd invited into her life had left its mark, and no amount of distance could make her feel safe again. For days, she regretted everything about that purchase. The click of a mouse, the simple thrill of curiosity. She had handed over her sense of security for what? The Red Room rumor that felt too real. Imagine clicking on a random link, your screen glowing faintly in a dark room as you lean forward with cautious curiosity. Slowly, a video stream loads, grainy footage like it was filmed on equipment decades out of date. A single dim spotlight illuminates the frame, casting long shadows on concrete walls. In the center of the image, there's a chair bolted to the floor, empty, at first, and then someone steps into the frame. Red rooms. The mere mention of them sends chills down the spine for those who've heard the stories. They're part urban legend, part worst case scenario, live streams hosted deep in the dark web where unspeakable acts of violence and terror are carried out in real time for paying viewers. Those who stumble into these spaces are said to become an uninvited witness, frozen as the events unfold in front of them. But there's always been a question of whether red rooms are real or just another exaggeration tied to the mystery of the dark web. One user thought the idea was absurd until they found themselves glued to their screen, watching something they wish they could forget. Like most stories of curiosity gone wrong, this all started with a moment of boredom. The person didn't dive into the dark web looking for anything specific. They were just exploring, poking through forums and marketplaces, testing to see how much of the myth was true. They'd heard about red rooms in passing, but dismissed them as ridiculous, fake. They'd laughed when someone warned them about encrypted links and private streams. After all, if something that horrifying were being hosted online, surely someone would have uncovered proof by now. It was during one of those casual browsing sessions that the link appeared, shared on an obscure forum. It came with no description, only the words, "Watch if you're brave enough." The title was generic, unremarkable, just a meaningless string of letters and numbers followed by a .onion domain. It could have been anything, a prank, a dead end, or just another repository of bizarre content people put online for shock value. Against their better judgment, they clicked it. The screen went black for what felt like longer than it should. A dull loading icon circling lazily in the center. Then the image materialized, a live stream window. Instantly, they noticed how low quality the feed was, like someone filming on an old VHS camcorder. The setting was claustrophobic, a narrow, cement-walled room that gave off the vibe of a basement or bunker. Nothing in the frame looked staged. There were no props, no signs of production, just the chair in the center, illuminated by one harsh light overhead. At first, nothing happened. No movement, no sound, just static in the background of the grainy stream. Then the chat caught their attention. A flurry of messages scrolled rapidly, written in what seemed to be a mix of languages, short, clipped phrases, some of them barely coherent. Others were in English, though their tone wasn't reassuring. "It's starting soon," one said, followed by a string of emojis that seemed chillingly inappropriate for the context. Then the figure appeared. Slowly walking into the frame was someone wearing a mask, pure white, featureless, except for dark, hollow eye sockets. They moved deliberately, stepping up to the empty chair before pausing, as if waiting for something. The chat exploded in activity. Finally, one comment read. Another simply said, "More." The viewer couldn't look away, even as dread began to set in. Every instinct told them to close the tab, to shut the laptop. But a darker sense of curiosity rooted them in place. Just when they thought the scene couldn't feel more unsettling, the masked figure turned and motioned toward someone off-screen. A second person was shoved into the frame, bound to a chair by their wrists and ankles, their head covered with a burlap sack. The faint sound of muffled cries broke through the crackling audio. That's when the viewer's breath caught. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some cheaply staged video to shock dark web amateurs. This felt real. The chat became a stream of orders, demands, people typing furiously, throwing out suggestions for what they wanted to see happen next. It was as though the viewers had control over the scene, directing it like a twisted performance. Whoever was running the live stream seemed to be watching the chat, responding through their body language. The burlap sack was removed, revealing a terrified face beneath. Someone wide-eyed, trembling, begging silently for help. It was unbearable, but the viewer couldn't stop watching. They tried to convince themselves it might still be fake, some over-the-top stunt to sell the illusion of horror. But the expressions on the victim's face shook them to their core. The kind of fear etched into those eyes wasn't something even the best actor could replicate. This was real. Too real. In a moment of panic, they tried to exit the browser, slamming the close button repeatedly. But nothing happened. The screen stayed frozen on that horrifying image, figures moving in slow, jerky motions as the stream continued. Their mouse refused to work. The entire system locked up. Then, the chat lit up with a new comment. One directed not at the perpetrators or the victim, but at the viewer themselves. It was a single message. Their name. Their heart dropped. How could anyone know? Shaking now, they tried to yank the power cord from their laptop, desperate to shut it down. But before they could, another message appeared in the chat. This time, their home address. The normalization of sound, the whir of machines, the faint footsteps outside, suddenly felt suffocating, as if the walls of their home were starting to close in. Were they being watched? Were they next? Just as the screen seemed to flicker, the entire browser crashed, leaving them staring at their desktop. An eerie silence filled the room, but the fear didn't lift. It grew. In their mind, they replayed every click, every moment leading up to this, searching for answers that might explain what had just happened. Had they been hacked? Was this someone targeting them from the start? Or had they drawn attention just by watching? The questions piled up, but the screen offered no resolution, just the faint, steady hum of their laptop's fan. They spent the rest of the night in the kind of paranoid spiral only something like this could bring. They double-checked that all the doors were locked. They unplugged their devices and placed their laptop in a drawer, as if that might somehow sever the connection. Every sound seemed amplified, branches brushing the window, cars passing on the street. Even days later, the unease refused to fade. They'd never felt more exposed in their life. Though the experience rattled them deeply, they never could confirm what they had seen. A part of them still clings to the hope that it wasn't real. Maybe it was an elaborate scare tactic, one built to capitalize on the dark web's aura of terror. Maybe their computer freezing and the messages in the chat were coincidence. But deep down, there's a more horrifying thought. What if it wasn't a trick at all? What if what they witnessed had been real, and they had unwittingly walked into the darkest corner of human depravity? The regret of that one click haunts them to this day. By now, they've wiped their entire system, out of fear that some trace of the event might attract whoever, or whatever, was behind that stream. Yet no amount of antivirus software or deleted files can remove the memory burned into their mind. It's not just the events in the video that haunt them, but the realization that they were helpless, an anonymous observer at the mercy of an anonymous monster. They'll never know for sure if the danger has passed or if, somewhere out there, the mask will appear again, this time looking directly at them. Some say red rooms are nothing more than internet folklore, a grim fairy tale born from the imaginations of horrified listeners. But then there are stories like this one, stories that blur the a cursed website that refused to let go. What if a website didn't just disappear when you closed your browser? What if it clung to you like a shadow you can't outrun no matter how hard you try? That's exactly the nightmare. One person found themselves living after a single careless click. It started as boredom, but it ended as something far worse. The story begins with a man in his mid-20s, a self-proclaimed explorer of the dark web who'd spent months rummaging through its hidden corners out of sheer curiosity. He wasn't searching for anything in particular. Like many who venture into that part of the internet, he was drawn to the mystery of it, the idea that he might stumble across something rare or secret, something no one else had seen. But one night, his fascination got the better of him. A link caught his eye on a forum he hadn't visited before. It had no description, just a vague title in red, fathersfears.exe. Intrigued instantly by its cryptic nature, he clicked it without hesitation. What loaded wasn't immediately alarming, just strange. The site's design was rudimentary, almost childish. The background was pitch black, with faint red text scrolling across the screen, sentence by sentence. The words made no sense at first, a bizarre mix of cryptic phrases and unsettling questions. Whose face do you see in the dark? Followed by disturbing statements. Your spine remembers breaking before it even happened. The longer he stared, the more off balance he felt. His heart started racing for no reason he could pinpoint. It wasn't outright scary, but it was uncomfortable. A kind of unease that clung to him the way shadows can seem heavier at night. But it wasn't just what was written. As he scrolled, strange imagery began to fade into view behind the red text. Faint outlines of distorted faces, eyes that seemed too wide for their sockets, mouths twisted in silent screams. He also noticed something peculiar about the layout. Every time he clicked to move forward, a loop of audio was triggered in the background. It wasn't music, exactly. It was hard to say what it was. It sounded garbled, as though voices were layered together, but slowed down so much that all that was left was an ominous low hum. Sometimes, he swore he could hear words, though just beneath the edge of comprehension, murmurs, names maybe, and laughter. Faint, distant laughter. By the time he reached the bottom of the page, his unease bloomed into genuine fear. There, in plain text, was his full name, middle name included, followed by his IP address. An unnerving reminder of how exposed he was on this so-called anonymous platform. Beneath it was a single button that read simply, agree. He didn't dare click it. His stomach sank. He immediately exited the page, or at least he thought he did. But then things started to go very, very wrong. For the first few minutes, it seemed like everything was fine. He sat in the glowing light of his computer screen, telling himself it was just a weird prank site. But then, pop-up messages began appearing. small chat bubbles in the corner of his screen. At first, they were just question marks, one blinking into existence every 30 seconds or so. Then short, vague sentences followed. "We saw you. Come back." His mouse cursor froze, jumping sporadically across his screen no matter how much he tried to control it. He began rapidly pressing escape, backtracking through the browser history to make sure the tab was really closed. But no matter where he looked, the link wasn't there anymore. It had vanished, like it had never existed in the first place. That night, things escalated. He thought shutting his laptop would put an end to the experience. But as he lay in bed, notifications lit up his phone screen, one after another. Unknown numbers, random emails. They came in quick bursts. The same unsettling message, repeated over and over. "You can't leave until we're done with you." Some messages were even more direct. "Why did you stop scrolling?" Desperation began to creep in. He blocked the numbers, erased the emails, even wiped his phone entirely in the hopes of removing any trace of the site. But none of it worked. By the next day, the messages had slowed, but his electronic devices began behaving erratically. Lights on his router blinked at unusual speeds. His laptop, which was powered off on his desk, turned itself on at random intervals. Once, a pop-up appeared on the blank screen while he was in another room, visible only when he noticed its pale glow reflecting on the wall. It read, "Look behind you." He ran through his apartment in a panic, convinced someone had broken in. The doors were still locked, but that didn't stop him from checking every corner, every closet, even under the bed. He was entirely alone, or so it seemed. A few days later, the occurrences became even harder to ignore. It wasn't just his electronics anymore. During the night, his apartment started feeling off. Lights flickered sporadically, and his heat would suddenly stop during the coldest hours. Worst of all was the sensation he couldn't shake. He felt watched. He would frequently catch himself glancing over his shoulder, looking down the hallway as though someone might be standing there, just beyond the edge of the light. Even his neighbors noticed a change in him, remarks about how pale or jumpy he looked when they passed him by. He kept brushing those interactions off with nervous laughter, unable to explain what was driving him into this spiral of paranoia. And yet, he couldn't shake the fact that the cursed web page he'd visited might be the source of it all. One night, determined to take control, he powered up his laptop and opened his history to erase any trace of the site. That's when he noticed something chilling. The link had embedded itself there, but something was wrong with it. Instead of a standard URL, what he found was his own reflection staring back at him from within the link, a warped, pixelated photograph of his own face, as though it had been quietly taken through the device's webcam without him knowing. His eyes in the image were wrong, vacant and distant, his mouth frozen in a slight, unnerving grimace. Terrified beyond reason, he deleted his entire browsing history, but it made no difference. The link reappeared the moment he restarted his computer, like some unwanted ghost haunting his system. He felt as though the website wasn't just a static page anymore, but something alive, something that had attached itself to him and was now following him relentlessly, rooted deep in the circuits of his devices and the corners of his mind. The breaking point came one night when he awoke suddenly to a loud crash, like something heavy had been knocked over in his living room. His heart raced as he crept out of bed, clutching his phone as a flashlight. When he reached the living room, he noticed everything was strangely still. No overturned furniture, no broken windows. But his laptop, which he'd left shut, was now wide open. On the screen was the same page he'd visited weeks ago, only now it had changed. There was no scrolling text, no eerie background imagery. Instead, it displayed a live feed. It took him a moment to realize what he was looking at: the grainy, low-angle view of his own bedroom, filmed from outside his window. He didn't think. He grabbed the laptop and threw it to the ground, smashing the screen in a single motion before unplugging his router entirely, as if cutting off the internet might save him. But the thought lingered at the edge of his mind. Whatever this was, it wasn't just living in his devices anymore. In the days that followed, he destroyed everything. His laptop was shattered, his router left on the curb, and his phone was replaced entirely. He didn't care how much it cost. The price didn't matter. What mattered was the silence that followed. But even after buying a clean slate of devices, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching him. He never did visit the dark web again. Some nights, he wonders if that decision came too late, if something had already been set in motion, something far beyond his control. What's more unnerving than any ghost story is the thought of being haunted by something we can't touch or fully comprehend, a website that blurs the line between the digital and the physical. For this man, there's no question about it. Some clicks can't be. The stranger who knew everything about you. What would you do if an email landed in your inbox out of nowhere, detailing every part of your life? Your name, your address, your phone number, the names of your parents, where you work, even the places you often go on weekends. All of it laid bare by a stranger. And the most chilling part? You didn't tell anyone. This story begins with the kind of decision that doesn't seem like much in the moment. The act of clicking around the dark web, casually browsing out of curiosity or boredom. That's exactly what happened to the man in this tale. Someone who thought he knew how to stay anonymous. He covered his tracks with VPNs, encrypted browsers, and disposable accounts. After all, he wasn't trying to buy anything dangerous or do anything illegal. He was there just to look, to explore the conversations and forums built on a foundation of secrecy. On one such forum, a quiet corner of the dark web filled with anonymous chatter, he noticed a thread that caught his eye. The title was vague, but intriguing. Do you want to play a game? Clicking it led him to what seemed like another one of those dark web oddities, stuffed with cryptic messages and riddles. Users were responding one after another, each leaving short, strange comments, but nothing made much sense. Sure, what are the rules? One person had typed. I'm already playing, said another, and then a reply appeared from the thread's original poster. Message me. Let's talk. A harmless invitation, or so it seemed. The man wasn't sure what kind of game this was supposed to be, but it leaned more toward the curious than the outright dangerous, at least at first. After watching how others swarmed to the thread, he decided to follow suit. From there, everything unraveled faster than he could have imagined. He sent a private message, opening with a simple question: "What's the deal with this game?" The response came almost immediately, too quickly perhaps, but it didn't raise any red flags then. The anonymous stranger replied with, "The real question is, how much do you want to know about yourself?" It felt like a joke, the kind of vague statement people use to bait others for attention. That was exactly how he interpreted it. Amused, he played along, replying with, "Surprise me." The next message wasn't funny at all. It was a long list, a detailed profile of his own life, typed out like a dossier. His full name, age, and address took up the first few lines. Then came names of family members, their occupations, their birthdays. Where he worked was listed next, down to the floor of the building he commuted to each week. And as his eyes scanned the list, the pit in his stomach grew heavier. There were things on there no one should have known. His daily habits, notes about the coffee shop where he liked to spend his Sunday mornings, comments about a car he drove that didn't even appear in any of his online registrations. It was a vehicle he'd purchased secondhand, one he didn't talk about publicly. And yet, this nameless stranger knew. For the first time, he hesitated to click on the next message. That hesitation was swallowed by an overwhelming need to understand how they had found out so much. He messaged back, trying to sound calm. "How do you know this?" The stranger replied, "You left breadcrumbs everywhere." Confusion tangled with terror. Breadcrumbs? He thought he had been so careful. At no point did he use his real name, link anything back to his usual email address, or even access the dark web without heavy precautions. But as the stranger pointed out, precautions mattered little when other people, the people closest to him, weren't so concerned. "The coffee shop you visit uses insecure Wi-Fi," they wrote. "Your family, too much activity on social media. Ever think where their posts lead back to?" Every weak point was outlined, every mistake made clear, in a way that made him feel exposed, cracked open under a glaring spotlight. The tone of the stranger's messages shifted after that. It became darker, less conversational, more commanding. "I know everything about you," they typed in one of the next messages. "And now, you're going to do something for me." The demands began small, almost laughable, in contrast to the gravity of what was happening. They asked him to send them a single dollar of cryptocurrency, simply to prove that he would cooperate. He almost didn't take it seriously, as ridiculous as it sounded. But then, the next message arrived. A photograph of his apartment, taken from across the street. He froze. The angle was unmistakable. It wasn't an old picture, pulled from somewhere random. There was no way it could be. It showed a detail only he would recognize. A small, personalized sign in his bedroom window, visible in reverse from where the picture had been taken. For the first time, it hit him that this wasn't just about online threats anymore. It was bigger than that. Someone wasn't just watching through a screen. They could physically see him, maybe even follow him. The paranoia crept in quickly. After that, overshadowing whatever small sense of control he had left. When he didn't comply immediately, they upped the stakes. Another email came through, attached to a screenshot of a text conversation between him and a close friend. His stomach dropped. The messages weren't recent, but they were private, things they'd discussed months before, well out of the public eye. How could they possibly have gotten access to that? The stranger's threats became clearer. "Pay me what I'm asking, or these conversations become public. Everyone in your office will see them. Family, too. His mind raced. He didn't care so much about money, but it wasn't the cash they were asking for that scared him. It was the reminder of how little control he had. Every aspect of his life suddenly felt like it might belong to somebody else. Even as he scrambled to figure out how his data had leaked, the answers never fully came together. Was his phone hacked? Had someone been tracking him for longer than he realized? Or were there still other weak spots he wasn't seeing? Knowing didn't matter nearly as much as the damage done. Overwhelmed, he transferred the money. He thought it would end things there. But of course, it didn't. That's not how these things work. Once you give in, you reveal your vulnerability, and the cycle only deepens. A few days passed with silence and an eerie calm, but within a week, another email arrived. This time the demand was bigger, the stakes higher. The stranger warned him not to ignore their message, attaching a short, horrifying note. Just remember how much I know and how easy it is for me to get more. Included was a snippet from his work email, an account he had never once used on the dark web, proving their reach extended further than he thought. Every waking hour after that was consumed by paranoia. The slightest movement outside his apartment made him jump. He braced himself every morning before checking his messages, filled with dread over what he might find waiting for him. He turned to cybersecurity experts and even contacted law enforcement in the hopes of protecting himself. But they were limited in how much they could do. The anonymity of the dark web worked against him here just as much as it had always worked for whoever had been watching him. They could be anyone, anywhere. And as the tension chipped away at his sense of safety, he began wondering if they were closer than he thought. Eventually, he unplugged from everything entirely. He wiped his devices, deleted every account he could trace back to himself, and withdrew from the internet for good, terrified of leaving behind any digital footprint that might make him an even easier target. The demands stopped soon after, but the fear never fully left him. He moved apartments, changed every password he could think of, and spent years looking over his shoulder. Even small coincidences, like seeing unfamiliar cars outside his home, made his chest tighten with panic. He may not live in direct fear of that stranger anymore, but their presence lingers in the corners of his mind. He no longer scrolls online for hours or exchanges texts without wondering if someone else is reading them. Every anonymous click feels loaded, every email an echo of a nightmare he can't quite escape. It's not just the fear of being watched or exposed, it's the realization that someone had unraveled his entire life from the shadows of a place he thought he could navigate safely. The dark web sells the promise of total anonymity, an escape from the eyes of the world. But horror stories like this one prove how thin the veil of protection really is. A live stream that took a terrifying turn. Imagine this: a group of friends gathered in a dimly lit living room, late at night, laptops open, and the glow of screens casting sharp shadows on the walls. The air is filled with nervous laughter and shared excitement as they scroll through a list of links. their attention falling on those marked with odd titles, unnamed live streams hosted deep on the dark web. It was supposed to be just another thrill, something to shake up a boring weekend and scare themselves in the way only the anonymity of the internet can. But what they stumbled across that night wasn't just another creepy video. It became a horrifying memory that none of them could ever escape. Watching live streams hosted on the dark web might sound like something no sane person would do, but for some, it's a twisted kind of entertainment. People boast online about their experiences, claiming to have witnessed everything from bizarre art performances in abandoned warehouses to questionable rituals that make your skin crawl. The mystery is the appeal. Is it staged? Is it real? And perhaps the most terrifying question, how far will it go? These friends were eager to find out, prepared for dark humor or even absurd scares, but not for the nightmare that this stream would become. The link should have been their first warning. Unlike most of the ones they'd clicked on that night, this one didn't have a cryptic title full of emojis or broken text. It was clean, almost sterile, a string of random numbers and letters with a single word next to it, live. That simplicity made it stand out. No hints about what they were about to experience, no clues about whether it was even worth their time. It dared them to click it, and after a quick glance at each other for reassurance, they did. The screen flickered, and a video began to buffer. At first, the scene that loaded seemed surprisingly normal. The camera was pointed at a quiet street in what appeared to be a suburban neighborhood. Rows of houses barely outlined in the faint light of distant street lamps. It was a static shot, as though someone had left a camera pointed out of their window. Nothing particularly alarming stood out, and one of the friends laughed. This is it? Just somebody spying on their block? The others chuckled nervously, already scrolling through the comments on the side of the stream. The chat was bizarre. Dozens of people were actively watching, their messages scrolling rapidly up the screen. Most were in languages they couldn't understand, but some were in English. Any second now, one user wrote. This is going to get messy, said another. A few messages seemed excited, commands almost. Closer, keep the angle, turn the lights off. But closer to what? The friends exchanged uneasy glances. Still, they kept watching. As the minutes dragged on, nothing changed. The feed remained focused on that same quiet street, and the friends began scrolling through other tabs, occasionally glancing back to see if anything had happened. Then, out of nowhere, there was movement. A dark figure appeared in the distance, walking slowly down the street toward the camera's viewpoint. They couldn't make out much detail, just the shadowy outline of someone wearing a hooded jacket. Their head lowered. The figure's pace was deliberate, almost robotic, as though they were counting every step. The friends leaned forward, squinting to see better through the grainy resolution. The chat exploded with comments, messages flooding in faster than they could read. Most of it still didn't make sense, but a few words repeated, "It's starting." The figure in the stream stopped directly under a street lamp, the light casting their shadow, long and distorted, on the asphalt. They didn't move, didn't look around, just stood eerily still. Then, after what felt like several minutes, they slowly raised one hand and waved toward the camera. The motion was unnatural, the kind of slow, deliberate movement that made you uncomfortable without knowing why. "No way they know we're watching," one of the friends joked, though their voice carried an edge of nervousness now. Just as the laughter died down, a new message appeared in the chat, written in all capital letters. One of you should check the window. Silence. The friends froze, instinctively glancing toward the blinds, covering the only window in the room. Was it just a coincidence? Nervous laughter broke out again, but it was shakier this time. Okay, creepy guy in chat, one muttered, dismissing the message. They tried to laugh it off, but the unease had definitely set in. It didn't help that, in the stream, the figure hadn't moved an inch. They were still standing under the lamp, their hand now lowered, their face hidden in shadow. Then things escalated. The stream shifted, so subtly at first that it took a few seconds for anyone to notice. The camera had zoomed in, just slightly, but enough to narrow the frame and focus more closely on the figure in the street. Whoever was controlling the camera, if it was controlled at all, was moving it in real time. The friends stared in silent discomfort as the figure finally began to move again, walking toward a house in the distance. The realization came slowly at first, creeping in like a cold draft. The houses looked familiar. Wait, one of the friends muttered, furrowing their brow. Does that look like... They didn't finish the sentence, but everyone else knew exactly what they meant. The street the camera was focused on looked eerily similar to one just a few blocks from where they were sitting. The live stream continued. The figure moved methodically, stopping in front of one of the houses. The chat continued its feverish pace, the excitement of the viewers growing palpable. A new comment popped up. Get ready. Another. It's happening. The figure stood there, staring at the house, still half shrouded in the uneven glow of the street lamp. That's when the camera jolted sideways, like someone had grabbed it roughly, and the angle shifted to focus on the front door of the house in question. One of the friends whispered, That looks like your house." They turned sharply to the friend who lived just down the block. Slowly, with mounting dread, they began pulling up pictures from their phones, comparing what they were seeing on the live stream to real photos taken outside their homes. The more they looked, the stronger the sinking feeling became. It wasn't similar. It was identical. Every detail, down to the shape of the front yard, was a perfect match to the neighborhood they thought they knew. Panic set in as the friends debated what to do. They were paralyzed, staring at the screen, unwilling to close the stream, but too terrified to keep watching. Then came the sound that turned the terror into reality. A knock at the door. It wasn't loud or frantic, just a simple, deliberate knock, as though the person on the other side wasn't in a rush. All heads snapped toward the window, and for several seconds, no one dared to move. The air felt electric with tension, the questions racing through their minds unspoken. Could it really be the same figure from the stream? And if it was, how had they arrived so quickly? The knocking continued, steadier now, harder, as though whoever was on the other side had grown impatient. One of the friends, braver than the others, or maybe just more panicked, crept toward the window to peek through the blinds. The stream still played in the background, showing the same house from somewhere farther down the street. By then, the chat had nearly doubled in activity, viewers egging them on with phrases like, "Answer it," and "Is the camera good?" The friend froze as they peered outside. They didn't say a word, but their face was pale when they turned back to the group. "It's them," they whispered hoarsely. The person from the video? They're outside. Chaos erupted. Phones were grabbed. Calls frantically made to authorities as the rest of the group scrambled to lock doors and close curtains. The stream, still playing on one of the laptops, remained disturbingly calm. The camera hadn't moved, the figure still seemingly standing near the front door of the house in the video. The eerie connection between what they were witnessing on screen and what was happening outside blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Was the footage live? Was it pre-recorded? Or was there another layer to all of this? Something darker, something they hadn't even thought to fear yet. By the time the police arrived, the knocking had stopped. The figure was gone, leaving nothing but faint marks in the dirt near the front steps. The friends huddled together, half crying, half shaking, as they tried to explain what had just happened. They described the stream, the neighborhood, the figure, but when the authorities checked the laptops, the link was gone. The stream had ended without a trace. No evidence, no history, no proof. Weeks passed, but the fear lingered. Every knock on the door sent their hearts racing. Every distant shadow under a street lamp brought back the memory of that figure's slow wave. But the worst part was knowing their story wasn't unique. There were others sharing similar tales in dark corners of the internet. Whispers of live streams blending too closely with reality, of unseen viewers pulling strings from the other side of the screen. And though the friends have moved on, the questions still haunt them. Who was controlling the camera? How had the figure found their way to that door? And, perhaps most terrifying of all, what would have happened if they'd answered that knock? But the scariest stories are the ones that stay with you forever. The dark web remains one of the internet's greatest mysteries, a veiled world where anonymity reigns, and curiosity has drawn countless into a realm they were never prepared to face. For some, it's a lure of the forbidden. For others, it's a gate they vow to keep shut after one wrong click. Perhaps some doors are better left closed, and some links are better left unclicked. It's easy to think curiosity is harmless until the shadows begin to feel too close. Because once you've seen what's out there, the silence behind the screen, the secrets, it's almost impossible to unsee.